You may or may not have noticed that I've been using this national holiday, Zelda month, as an excuse to talk about a ton of Zelda spin-off games. That's sort of been the joke of Zelda month, talk about everything except mainline Zelda. Well, today I'm going to be talking about something that's not only a spin-off, but also a piece of lost media. That's right, I'm talking about the 3 different Zelda titles that were broadcast in collaboration with St. Geiga for download via the Super Famicom's Satellaview subsystem between 1995 and 1997. You know, that weird satellite service for the Super Nintendo that was only in Japan. These 3 games were BS Zelda no Densetsu, BS Zelda no Densetsu Map 2, and BS Zelda no Densetsu Initiate no Sekiban. No, it doesn't stand for bullshit, 10-year-old me browsing the Zelda wiki. It stands for Broadcast Satellaview, which was the service they were on. Interestingly enough, all 3 of these feature vocal tracks over them, and that means they're the first Nintendo-sponsored Zelda games to use voice acting. Yes, Nintendo-sponsored. I know that game came first. They were the first games ever to use radio integration. Around the same time, in 1997, a non-voice acted port of A Link to the Past, aka Zelda no Densetsu Kamigami no Triforce in Japan, was released for the service, but it was essentially the same game, so it's barely worth noting. St. Geiga apparently continued broadcasting A Link to the Past until sometime in the early 2000s, and it's a shame that that was the only one that was rerun for so long because that's the only one you could get in a more tangible state. Sadly, none of the titles that were made for this Satellaview service specifically have ever been re-released, and there's really no way to play them legally anymore. However, considering the fact that the Satellaview title BS Fire Emblem Akaneya Senki was re-released in 2010, there might be hope that these games will also be re-released someday. I just won't be holding my breath considering how Nintendo treats even its regular catalog of games. Most of the fan debate around these games is the question of whether they're just enhanced remakes or if they're weird spin-offs. I think they're a mix of both, which you'll soon see as I discuss them. There's also a lot of debate over whether or not they should be considered canon. Personally, I think the Zelda canon is stupid on the whole, so I am glad that they are officially not considered canon. I'll probably do a video on why I hate the Zelda canon in the future, but for now just know that I think it's dumb and messy. So let's get into the first game of the series, BS Zelda no Densetsu, the hell that started this all. Interestingly enough, this game doesn't star Link at all. It stars the main character from BSX, which is the game that uses the menu system for Satellaview games. Honestly, I think that game is really neat on its own, but I'll talk about that another time. Anyway, this first game is essentially an enhanced remake of Zelda 1, and its sequel, BS Zelda no Densetsu Map 2, is a remake of Zelda 1's Second Quest, which was made because apparently playing an enhanced remake of Zelda 1 was super popular. Now, BS Zelda no Densetsu already had a different map than both Zelda 1 and the Second Quest, and Map 2 has another different map, so if you really want to get into the meat and potatoes of this, technically, Map 2 is actually Map 4, of Zelda 1. This was a nightmare to program because of how much quality control Nintendo had over the project. Even though I think the programmers should have been treated better, I actually appreciate the amount of quality control because the end result ended up with no lag and no notable bugs after 2 beta versions, which is immense for one of the first and only satellite broadcasted games ever. Due to the large file size of the voice narration being far too much for a Super Famicom to handle, the game was broadcasted in 4 distinct episodes. Though there was no way to display more than one player in the game at once, there were several references to the idea of other players in the narration and a scoreboard for people to compete against, which I think is a small way of achieving the Satellaview's mission statement of bringing together players from all over Japan. But not really substantial enough to justify the shitty satellite service. The general plot of the game is very similar to the first Zelda, with a lot of embellishment from A Link to the Past to help out with it. Something I find particularly humorous about this need for additional plot is the fact that the old man in the cave from the first Zelda game is now a significantly more substantial player in the story, like aiding the protagonists with magical abilities throughout their quest. The additional BSX backstory to this game is that every Sunday at a certain time a portal opens to Hyrule. But the player character will be ejected after an hour inside the portal, which the game world refers to as some kind of curse known as Zelda time, but we all know as the Satellaview's programming block. I don't think satellite streaming and television time blocks really work with games. It's weird to be booted out of something once you've really gotten into the groove of it. It's kind of like the level bootouts in Super Mario 64. though even more jarring because you can't even play the game again until a week later. I'm not a fan of this. Gameplay wise, I gotta keep my cards close to my chest here, so I won't really give my opinion. I'm planning on doing a video on the first Legend of Zelda game eventually, so I don't want to tell you what I think here and discount that. However, what I will say is that this game is essentially the same as the first Zelda game, just with the added vocal track and enhanced graphics. Now, something really cool about this game is that even though it's near impossible to play now, emulation efforts for it have come a really long way. There are ROM hacks that put all 4 episodes together in one package, and adding a save select menu to the game. The original voice acting is completely lost, but since the script was recovered, there are fan projects that recreate the voice acting. It's really something incredible. There are even English, Spanish, French, and German translations of the game now. This was even done for its sequel too, The Power of Fandom. The next game, BS Zelda no Densetsu Initiate no Sekiban, is interesting in the regard that many people also think of it as a remake, this time of A Link to the Past. However, this one is considerably different from A Link to the Past in the plot department, so if it were a remake, then I would applaud its boldness in being different to the original source material. This plot is a lot weirder than the first ones, which was essentially just a retelling of Zelda 1 with more details. Here we have a lot more going on. Link has left Hyrule, presumably doing weird Link's Awakening related stuff, and now the player character from the last game has to go and find some ancient stone tablets that may or may not have hints to defeating Ganon on them. Assembling them and then translating them with the handy Book of Medora from A Link to the Past reveals the silver arrows and the sacred bow for beating Ganon with. Then you just go beat Ganon and leave. Pretty standard stuff, though there is a weird OC named Agana who is like Sahasrara's brother. Apparently he's mentioned in A Link to the Past as well, but I don't remember him. There is a similar issue here to the first BS Zelda game in terms of me talking about the gameplay. That being that I can't really talk about a lot of the gameplay mechanics here because I plan on talking about A Link to the Past later on down the line. Something that I do really like that is exclusive to this version is the incorporation of a mole character. Basically, there's this mole who shows up and shows you a place full of rupees to collect. However, every Sunday, where this place full of rupees and where the mole is on the map change. Even if you rerun the same part of the game, the mole's location is different. I think this is a really interesting way of tapping into the strengths of what is a pretty lame system all things considered. Those are the 2 unique BS Zelda games. There's also the A Link to the Past port, but like, what am I going to tell you, it's A Link to the Past? They're basically just enhanced versions of the games that they're clearly copying, even if their stories are slightly different. With that being said, I think there's sort of a magic to them. These limited time relics that you can only play under specific circumstances. I don't know, I think the concept was neat, but the execution was pretty lackluster. But whatever, the Satellaview games are dead and gone, and it's time to finally bury them 20 years later. This has been Arcade Gem Everlasting, YouTube videos only visible on Sundays from 7 PM to 8 PM, signing out. Thank you for watching.